Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back. I hope that you enjoyed lunch and the parallel sessions. We have heard both in this morning's talk and the parallel sessions that although we know a lot about the various domains relevant to research and pesticide reduction, that there are still many things to be discovered and many things to be implemented. We may wonder whether new approaches or new ways of running and implementing research should be explored to help us with both pesticide reduction and the adoption of the known methods by both farmers and the supply chain. In order to discuss these questions, I am very pleased to be joined by an international panel of experts. From Hungary, we have Szilvia BENCZE. From Germany, we have EWERT. From the Netherlands, we have Violette GIESSEN. And from France, we have HUYGHE. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Franck, to start this discussion, how do we identify sustainable cropping systems with low pesticide use?
Thanks very much, Joanna. Welcome back, everyone, to this panel discussion. First of all, I think we have seen great presentations today already in the plenary session and also in the parallel sessions, at least the ones that I have attended. The answer to your question has two sides. One is perhaps a bit more difficult, but there's also some good news. The challenging part of that is that there is no silver bullet answer to that question. What is the sustainable cropping system? The good part of that is that we know what we have to consider when we want to design sustainable cropping systems. First of all, we think that the aspects of sustainability needs consideration in the different dimension with respect to the ecological side, the socio-cultural, but also the economic aspect. And we had several presentations on the importance of these different aspects as well, but we need to integrate those. We probably know most about the ecological side, and we had great presentations of the advances that we have made in that respect. That brings me to the second aspect, which refers to the consideration of the context. Many presentations have stressed that item by considering the specific pedoclimatic conditions, but also the socioeconomic conditions within which we develop cropping systems. So there is no one direction to go, but there is a context-specific idea or context-specific setting within which we want and have to develop the specific solutions. The third aspect to consider is that we have different strategies. We heard about that as well in the morning. There are different strategies to achieve a sustainable pesticide-reduced cropping systems, and those strategies also need to be integrated. And the fourth aspect is that we need to consider that cropping systems cannot be sort of targeted in isolation. We need to also consider the larger system context up until the value chain, including the retailers, including consumer markets, if we want to develop sustainable cropping system. So that, I think, has become quite clear. To bring this all together, I guess that's a challenge that we are facing in this research community, but also beyond. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very complete answer, Franck. Violette, which monitoring systems should be put in place to assess the environmental and health impacts of agricultural systems of both today and in the future?
Yeah, this is a very good question, because I think there is a challenge, because actually we are living in a system where we do not know which are the impacts on human and ecosystem health. What we actually find is mixtures of pesticides in all environmental compartments. For example, we found last time 32 different pesticides in air and dust samples in agricultural areas in the Netherlands. Nobody knows the risk on human health, the risk for the ecosystem. All the mixtures we now find are not assessed. And the question is, which effect does this have on ecosystem health, on human health? And what I think what would be very important is, first of all, to establish in a very short term measures, and we try to work on these to get new indicators and as well new tests to see what is the real effect on real existing pesticides in the environment, and then convert this to policies and say, okay, look, we cannot guarantee that these concentration we find in the ecosystem, we find in human blood, in human urine, that this is safe. So use a precautionary principle and make the transition to sustainable agriculture, not affecting human, environmental, and animal health.
Thank you very much, Violette. Szilvia, from a biological perspective, what knowledge are we lacking in order to produce crops without pesticides?
Thank you for the question. Maybe it's in the air because during the day we have spoken a lot about these aspects. One of these is the use of the biocontrol organisms. I think, for example, some aspects in this have been already used in organic agriculture. Pathogen, predators, for example, or superparasites and antagonist organisms, which could be much better used if we had some information on them, because the ecosystem has feedback in every level, and nature has already developed these methods which we could use in this sense. There are also products which are from nature, and we already use it in organic agriculture, some extracts or acid or other products, and antibiotics could be used also, because some of the antibiotics are really the worst one for the organisms which nature already produced. So this is a field which we can do a lot of work. And also during the day and in the afternoon there were some speeches already on the other parts which I would like to draw attention to. This holobiont kind of seeing the system. The plant-pathogen interaction and also the soil is very, very important in it. Healthy soil, which means also that there is an equilibrium between mycorrhiza and fungi and the bacteria. And also, I would like to mention just an example. If there is excess nitrogen in the soil, and the plants would face a big problem in pests and diseases, and also weeds really like these conditions. So this kind of fine-tuning would be better. And if we mention the Liebig principle, we can do it in the other way around. If one element is in excess amount, then we might tune the whole system to have a higher production instead of problems for ourselves. Synthetic fertilizers is another question. Do we really need them? Or we can use manure, or we can use compost plant products. As I mentioned, that this is very difficult, and if you use mediation in this nitrogen or nutrient uptake, mycorrhiza are a good example to this, because they can provide much better than we can for the plants, because there is a very fine connection between them. So these fields are all which we could know much more about.
Okay, very complete answer. Thank you very much, Szilvia. Christian, what are some of the lessons we can use from organic farming, and more generally, how can we use agroecology in low pesticide farming systems?
Thank you. To build on what Szilvia mentioned about the pressure or the level of input that are provided to the crop, organic farming is a type of, or is a model or prototype of agroecology, and it has been shown that in the system where the level of input or the level of anthropization is lower, the mechanism, the pressure of the various pathogens is slightly different from the others, from what we see in conventional. And this is mainly due to the level of regulation that is taking place in the swords, in the territories, at the various level of organization of the diversity. And what is behind this is that if you manage, and this has been shown this morning, if you manage to increase the functional diversity, we will increase the number of and the intensity of the ecosystem services. And this is what is at the base of agroecology. So agroecology is not at all to say nature is going to do the business. We have to help it to do it correctly. And it has, how we use that, and it has been very well illustrated through a mixture of species. One of the parallel sessions, it has been shown that a tool to identify the way we build association to maximize the services, including the production, mixing varieties. And when you do this, in fact, we tend to say that we are putting all the effort on the biological side. It's also important to see that when you are increasing the level of agroecology, we must use also the input from the machinery side. Because we discussed a lot today the fungus control, so the fungicide aspects, insecticide, very little about the weed question. And the weed is something that is under control or higher under control when you are increasing the number of species in a sward, and the machinery is providing something, as it has been illustrated by Ricardo this morning. So moving from a crop to an agroecology, so agroecological transition means that we use all these mechanisms to enter the objective of safety that Violette analyzed and the way of thinking that Frank introduced.
Okay, so we have to help nature to do its job. And Christian, can you speak a bit about the new agricultural landscapes?
Yes. This morning, Ricardo also illustrated a few landscapes. And when we talk about landscape, the elements we have in mind is that the large fields are not compatible with high level of regulation. And this has been very well illustrated by a paper whose the first author is Clélia Sirami, and more than 500 sites worldwide, showing that when the mean size of the field are beyond 4 hectares, you have always a degradation of the status of the biodiversity. The trophic diversity is declining, simply because the way the movement of the organism is not good. So, but this does not at all fit with the representation we have today and what is compatible with the machinery. And when we tend to talk about landscape, we have a kind of dream in the past, small fields, edges everywhere. So for me, the 2 directions we have to look for is, can we imagine landscapes that are completely different? Quite recently, I attended a meeting of the Diver Impact Horizon 2020 program, and there were examples from Netherlands, from Denmark, and from Sweden with strip cropping. So instead of having plots that are more or less square, in fact, there were just very, very long strips, and only strips with different crops, which means easy to handle for a farmer and maximum regulation. And it's interesting to see that these fields are not at all compatible with the representation we have today. So the question is, what are the social norms we have of what is a nice agricultural landscape? And this has to be changed. If for many people, a nice field of wheat is a wheat field where you have only wheat, all the plant exactly the same height, not a single flower nowhere, and possibly nobody around. And this is probably something that has to change a lot, again, because it has to be, it has to correspond to an increasing services in terms of production, quality, welfare, environmental quality. So major change, but strip cropping, a recognized role of ecological infrastructure, and also not only thinking about the crops, but also the non-crop diversification. Because between 2 crops, you only have spare time. And this, what is in there, is also very, very important.
Okay, so we need research to be disruptive.
Exactly.
Okay.
But this is what we are here for today.
Exactly. Frank, what research is needed to pave the way towards the implementation of low pesticide systems, and how do we facilitate this transition?
It's a big question. We heard this morning that, I think in the first presentation, that Florence was making the point that we are we have to think about a new paradigm for agriculture. And to some extent we can put the question forward to which extent we need a new paradigm for our research if we want to address these big questions. From what I heard in the conference, I perhaps would tease out 3-4 main areas where new research or large advancements in research are needed. One refers to what Christian just said, or the agricultural landscape level, where we have lots of knowledge gaps in terms of the interaction of landscape elements, the integration of the different knowledge packages that we have related to soil, landscape, ecologies, actors in the landscape, socio-economic relationships, to bring all that knowledge together and utilize on that knowledge in order to design landscape that have a positive effect on the reduction of pesticides. So that's one area. Another area also came out of one of the presentations, refers to the microbiome. There's lots to gain, I guess, in advancing there with respect to the resilience of crops, resistance of crops against pests and diseases. And the third aspect refers to the breeding, also presentation in the morning by Frank Ordon, stressing the importance of advancing breeding to breed resistant crops. And the fourth aspect, and I think we need to put more attention on that, refers from my perspective to the opportunities that we could gain from the developments in the area of digitalization with respect to artificial intelligence, robotics, sensing, etc. I think there's a great deal also to utilize in order to advance our cropping systems. So these are the main areas, and I guess it has an implication, if we want to be successful, they are also on our research mode in terms of how integrated we are in performing research, not only in the short term with respect to projects, but also in the long term, because many of the things we are studying are not to be addressed in 2 or 3 years, which is a typical project lifetime, but they need a longer time horizon, and we don't have infrastructures for that really. So, and I think a third mode that comes more and more into play and also came out of several presentations is the interaction with the actors, between scientists and actors, to include that more in our research mode. Long-term, integrated research and integration with actors. Thank you.
Okay, integration. Yes. Szilvia, participatory approaches seem to define another way of running research. Do you think participatory breeding could help in reducing pesticide use?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we have talked a lot, or not we, but the speakers about breeding, and I fully agree that breeding has a key role in the future. Resistance breeding especially, because, for example, let's say an example for wheat, the herbicides are used during the breeding as well. We should not rely on these, and it's a kind of trend of which was not addressed by conventional breeding, because you either have higher harvest index and higher yield, or you have a robust plant which can resist weeds much better. Organic breeding has already focused this problem, and it's a great success, I would say, because these new varieties are really good and are performing really well. The participatory aspect in research and also in breeding focuses on the local needs. It's not a breeding station, but it's and also the problems and also the conditions in a farm are focused and targeted in both kind of aspects. This participatory research gives a possibility to make better choices for the farmer if they run experiments with many varieties on their local farms and not rely on the results of an ideal situation in some tests in the country somewhere. This and also they can choose now better adapted varieties to their circumstances, to their wheat flora or the disease situations. And participatory breeding is even more higher in that sense, because in this situation you have the possibility to select for the local needs, and in this case also the target, the project is in focus, so it's an opposite way of the thinking. And in the participatory breeding is usually focused on or based on heterogeneous material. And this is a quite good opportunity, because in a population you can have various kinds of pathogen-resistant genes, which also mean that if there is a sensitive and tolerant or resistant type or individual, or there are a mixture of them in the population, they can resist much better, because the resistant plants can just stop the diseases. And this is also true for species mixtures and also variety mixtures. And this participatory breeding can also serve as a basis to use these materials to select resistant individuals and establish a population or a line from them, but which are much more adapted to a local condition.
Thank you, Szilvia. Violette, the last question for this panel. According to you, what knowledge and data are missing today and need to become available to document health and environmental risks?
I think if we are all asking here in the room who thinks that a transition is necessary, we would all say, yes, we are here, therefore. If I go to my farmers and I ask them, do you think a transition is necessary? They tell me, why? And I think that is the biggest problem we have, actually, because how to explain a farmer whose system is fantastically working for him and it's economically healthy, why should he change? And I think we are missing a lot of data to tell the farmer that it is not healthy what is he doing, neither for his soils, nor for his health, nor for the surrounding ecosystem. But how do we tell this our farmers? We are convinced from this, why? So how can we do this knowledge transfer? And there I would need psychologists or people from social science who would tell me how to do this. And on the other hand, I would need to have transparent data from EFSA telling us for each endpoint which is tested, what is the risk or the hazard. We have checked all the data which are available, publicly available from EFSA conclusions, and we found for 47% no data about the mutagenicity of active substances, for 54% no data on endocrine disruptors. So how will I tell then my farmers, you should not use this and this product if I don't have the data myself? We do not have application data. We try to collect on national level application data per crop from the farmers. We don't get this data. They get accumulated data, but we cannot get this data. So there are big data gaps. Water Framework Directive makes it possible that the surface water bodies and the groundwater bodies are monitored. In the soil we are starting now. But what is the effect? And I give you one example. The indicators from EFSA for soils are very well defined. They test 5 groups of soil organisms. What we see in the case of glyphosate, this changes the soil microbiome, and the so-called good ones, the beneficial bacteria and fungi, are killed because they follow the Shikimate pathway 1, which is affected by glyphosate. The so-called bad ones, fusarian, fungi, pathogens that attack the plants, are not killed. So we get a strong inequilibrium in the soils, and the bad ones, the pathogens, can develop without having any natural enemies. Farmers tell me, yes, since I'm applying for many years glyphosate, I have to apply much more fungicides now. This effect has never been tested in anywhere. Yeah, so this is not an effect because it's not tested. So what we have to do is to test real effects of real concentrations we find in the environment, communicate this with farmers and consumers. If I tell a consumer, you know that 29% of your food contains mixtures of pesticides and nobody knows the effect on human health, They would say, what the hell is this? So we have to communicate what we know, but we need as well exact tests to see what is really going on to convince the society that a change is needed.
Thank you, Violette. So we have a lot of data, and we still need more data and more transparency. Now, for you in the audience, we have time for 1 or 2 questions for our panel of experts. Again, there are mics on both sides of the room. If anyone has any questions, I know it was a very short and sweet answer for each one of our panelists, but if this stirred up any questions or reactions, please feel free to ask your questions. Over on the left, we have 1 question.
Only a short question. You need more researchers for filling the gap for new data? You need, yes, you need more researchers in the field of research for have the new data for filling the gap?
If I may reply, it's what Violette said means more availability of data, so more transparency than researchers. But then the researcher can work on it. So the question of the availability of data is really something that is crucial.
And as well, looking for a real, look, the EFSA indicators have been made in the 80s or, I don't know, very long time ago. And they have never been validated with real life data. So the prediction of pesticides occurring in the ecosystem depends on models. These models do not, for example, include wind erosion, water erosion, transport-based things, and they do not check what is really happening on soil health, for example. So it's urgently to include these parameters, and we know these indicators, so they must be included into the measuring system. So it's both. One is availability of data, and the other one is, and we are working this in a project now as well, to see how can we implement the real indicators which give real information about the ecosystem health, but as well on human health.
Okay, and Frank, you would like to
Yes, I would like
contribute?
to take up this point to add another sort of thought or critical issue to where we can improve with respect to the data. I agree that in several respects we lack data, but on the other hand we also have a lot of data. And often these data are not available, accessible, reusable, and there's a lot to gain, I guess, to improve on our side as scientists the implementation of what we call the FAIR principles in terms of finding our data better, reusing those data better, make them accessible, etc. I think there's a lot to gain, and that's also something for not only for a research institute, but also for the cooperation of research institutes in order to develop data research infrastructures that could be used at national, at European level in order to utilize on all the data that have been produced already. There's a lot of data around somewhere.
Yeah, and that is as well with the networks we have. There are thousands of networks of farmers, but we do not put them all together. So that would, for me, if we have research money somewhere, just ask people to bring all these stakeholders together and give the knowledge gained on transition per cropping system and pedoclimatic zone, exchange it between the people, and don't start all new projects to gain the same knowledge which is somewhere else hidden. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for these very insightful conclusions, Violette, Frank, and Christian. This concludes our first panel, and we thank you very much to all the panelists for the very clear, insightful contributions and clarifications to these important questions on how to run research tomorrow. Thank you very much. I'm now going to invite panel 2 to come up onto the stage, please. So, welcome, panel 2. It is obvious that all the research results we have now, as we've just heard, need to reach the public and the policymakers. How can we do this? How can we improve the current situation? To answer this important question about making research more transparent, I have the pleasure of welcoming 4 international experts for our second panel. Based in Belgium, Jennifer Lewis, Executive Director, International Biocontrol Manufacturers Association, IBMA Global. From France, Philippe Regnault, Director of Plant Health at ANSES, the French Agency for Food, Environmental and Occupational Health and Safety. From Spain, Emilio Rodriguez Cerezo, Deputy Head of the Unit Economics of Agriculture at the Joint Research Center for the European Commission. And from Switzerland, Lucie Stam, Leader of the Department of Crop Sciences, Research Institute of Organic Agriculture from FIBL. Welcome, everyone. Philippe, would you say that research results and evidence are used enough to define public policies? What are the other elements that could be used and that you use at ANSES, the French agency?
Thank you very much. I think there has been actually a very interesting discussion almost on this very specific topic just before. So it's been a very nice transition towards this topic. Maybe, you know, beyond the fact that we need more data, more transparent data, it is useful to clarify that science-based evidence are indeed currently used in order, you know, to investigate the possibility to authorize a given active substance or to authorize afterwards a given commercial product. Because both the product producer, the applicant, and the assessor, the sanitary authority, are supposed to mobilize, to investigate to the most important extent the full scientific literature, first of all, and also, you know, all these results that have been obtained at the technical level by the involvement of technical institute, for example, on the lead of the applicant. That might be interesting, you know, to be this to get this mark in mind. But if we want to go also further on that topic, maybe in another direction, I mean, of course, more data, accessible data, transparent data, it is definitely the first basis of the right evolution of the topic. But we should also consider other directions. For example, it's not that difficult to find literature on toxicity, ecotoxicity, efficacy of a given active substance. It's much more difficult to find the equivalent on a given commercial product. Which lead to kind of less comfortable position, you know, in order to assess to the most appropriate way, the product itself. That's an issue. And there is also an issue, a very important one, is that the rhythm of research, of data providing, and the rhythm of regulation of the regulatory authorities are not the same. And in some cases, we can assess with a given batch, you know, of scientific knowledge. You give an authorization or not, and just afterwards, you've got a new publication providing new information, sometimes pretty different or even contradictory with the previous one, and it's pretty difficult, you know, to get this into the new landscape provided by this new publication. That's an issue also. It's more to do not with the content of the scientific data, but the time at which they are available to the community as well.
Mm-hmm. So we can have a conference just on this question alone, I believe. Emilio, revision of the Sustainable Use Directive is ongoing. What are the limiting or missing elements that research should contribute or provide?
Thank you very much for the question. And indeed, in a few weeks, this piece of legislation will be approved, hopefully. So from the point of view of the Scientific Advisory Service of the European Commission, that is the JRC, we have been needing impact assessment tools and models to justify the legislation, the intervention. So we have seen in the session today that these modeling tools have improved enormously. They are becoming very sophisticated. We know the Capri model and other models, so we are now in a position to look at the impact of the legislation on farmers and on the economy, which is good. And there are lines of improvement of policy assessment models. For example, we can refine some of the hypotheses that the models have. We can introduce the positive effects of biodiversity on yields, positive feedbacks on yields, and so on. So I think this is an important line of research. But this will be always, let's say, the part on impacts, so the impacts of legislation. But we need to show also the benefits of the legislation. We will be in need of a lot of information and data on the impacts of pesticides on health and the environment. And as Violette said before, we need to convince. And if possible, we need the support of economists in trying to monetize these externalities. We not always find data in money terms of the consequences of pesticide use. But on the other hand, you will easily find data on economic terms of the impacts of reducing pesticides. So we would like to have a better, maybe economic analysis or more intense of the consequences in human health and in the environment on pesticide use. And just to finish, once this legislation is in place, there will be the time to implement it and to monitor the progress and the efficiency of the measures of the reduction. And for this, we go back to the discussion in the previous panel on statistics. We are, all of us, unsatisfied with pesticide use statistics. So we need much better statistics in terms of spatial use, timing of the use. And all I can say is that from the point of view of the European Commission, there are two large initiatives to improve pesticide statistics. One is the farm level statistics that is going to move from the so-called FADN now to the Farm Sustainability Network. So farms and farmers will have to supply data on pesticide use to be able to, let's say, get our subsidies on the CAP. And also at the government level, the data they supply now on sales will have to be much more detailed and disaggregated. So that will take time. It will take years, but there is a movement to improve pesticide statistics, not only to look for the efficiency of the new policies, but also for a lot of research projects that are asking to have more data on use.
Okay, thank you. Collaboration seems key still. Philippe, what are the adequate levels of information to provide to all farmers to implement applicable, quantifiable, and easy-to-use solutions, for instance, in biocontrol?
Again, this issue has been not discussed, but has been presented this morning several times. I think that everybody more or less agrees that farmers, producers are ready, to integrate an incredible amount of new scientific information and to apply this amount as soon as possible at the field level. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've had the opportunity to interact with farmers since the last decades and even before. And each time, I could, I could see how the farmers had this willingness, to use, to apply the fruit of the mobilization of science. So for me, there's no issue. So maybe we should consider. I mean, if you think about the extent to which, for example, decision support system are applied, or the new technological tools that are applied in many different countries, in many different types of crop production and so on, it will work. Science is getting, distributed to the more and more important extent at the field level. But maybe we should also consider it the other way around a bit. I mean that maybe scientists, both scientists and policymakers should be more ready to accept to get information from the producer in order to address maybe new research questions that have not been addressed before. And saying that, I actually think to that specific farm networks that has been designed in the framework of the Ecophyto, the French Ecophyto plan, the Défi XP French farm networks. I think this could be a very nice opportunity, to get information raising from the field to both the scientists and the policymakers in order to make sure that we are indeed addressing at the scientific level the right research questions. So I think there's definitely an issue there. Otherwise, it's going to be an issue in terms of teaching effort, of course. But really, I think that the farmers are definitely ready for this. Yeah. Mm.
Okay, thank you very much. So the information is there. Some of the farmers are ready, and yet, Jennifer, some farmers are still risk adverse. How can we boost adoption by farmers of new low pesticide practices and production systems for these risk averse farmers?
Thank you. Well, I think we should remember that farmers are running a business, and Violette touched on that. And to change in a business, you really need an incentive and something for you at the end of the day, because any change in a business is a risk. And I think Robert Finger actually talked a little bit about that this morning, and saying that could we be using the cap more as a kind of insurance in the moment of change? And I think that would be a very good approach to ensure that we have a financial incentive linked to the change. And the other thing is, as a grower, as a farmer, is you want to see something work. And you want to see something work in your region, in your village, on your farm, in that field. And there's an awful lot of work to be done, and it's very exciting to be here and to see all the posters of these farmer networks that are being created. But we need to do much, much more of that to be able to show someone success, and what success looks like, and indeed adapt it to the particular farm and field that we're talking about.
Okay, great. And indeed, on-farm experiments and multi-actor approaches are becoming more common. Do you think that designs based upon living labs and multi-actor approaches could be an option then?
Absolutely. I think that they're definitely the way forward. And we see many examples where there has been multi-stakeholder working together. So, I always come back to the example of Albufera in Spain, where the regional government, the industry, the farmers, and the advisors all worked together to completely transform the way rice was being grown, so that you could combine the migratory birds special site, over 13,000 hectares, with rice growing in a key touristic area. And we can do so much more on that. And as I said, these examples that I've seen today of many projects, I think IPM Works, the Sprint project, so that there are many of them. And certainly, as IBMA, we would be very happy to contribute in any way, showing how which products are available, and even which products are in the pipeline, because 2030 is, as Christian said, tomorrow. So we need to have these solutions tried out. We need to have them put together in the field, and that's what part of the Living Lab approach is, and I think it's the right way forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Jennifer. Emilio, should a sustainability labeling or a reward by industries be supported by adapted policies?
Yeah, the issue of labeling at the European level, there is no harmonized sort of reduced pesticide use of this type of labels, except organic farming. So there is a lot of discussion in the farm-to-fork strategy on this type of measures, pull measures we call it, sustainable labels. In particular, there is one initiative in the farm-to-fork strategy, which will be the last one and the most difficult one, which will be the sustainable food system regulation. This is like a constitution we are trying to design, that will open the issue of sustainability in all vertical policies. And one of the elements we are discussing there is the creation of a sustainability label that is completely embryonic discussion, but it could include elements if you fulfill some of the elements of the 3-4 sustainability dimensions. One of them could be the issue of pesticides. So that could be the home or one of the homes for a future sustainability label in Europe. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Lucius, how can we ensure economic viability for farmers, supply chains, and for the society as a whole?
Well, the transformation of agriculture towards sustainability is just absolutely crucial for the survival of society. So insofar, we are discussing the costs and the challenges on the short-term perspective. On the long run, doing nothing will not be economically viable at all. Whereas if the transformation is successful, it will be economically viable. Now, what do we do in the meantime? It's quite clear it's a societal issue. So society as a whole should pay for it. It's only fair, but it's also pragmatic, because if the costs, all the burdens would go to the farmers, they simply don't do it, and it would be unfair. And if low-income families would suffer disproportionately from higher food costs, for instance, this would also endanger the whole exercise and the whole transformation. Because if you play hunger against biodiversity, it's quite clear that all transformation stops immediately. So there is no other option than to find a treaty, a societal treaty or deal. And at the end of the day, it's going to be the taxpayers who have to compensate for it.
Thank you, Lucius. Jennifer, how do you think that we could shorten the innovation pathway from research to practitioners?
Thank you. There are, I think, quite a lot of barriers, if you like, to getting products onto the market. And in Europe, we certainly find that the regulatory pathway is quite complex. And if we can simplify that, if we can, for some of the low-impact biocontrol type of products, provide more provisional authorization and fast-track them. And indeed, we also need more experts in this area in terms of evaluations. And I feel for the competent authorities as part of this transition, because we're trying to move from one set of skills looking at chemistry and what chemistry does to another set of skills looking at what biology does. And we really need to provide those skills to be able to speed up the whole process for everybody.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. And Lucius, coming back to what we discussed a bit before, well, the question is often asked whether the pesticide reduction objective fits with the objective of food security. But shouldn't we perhaps think of the question the other way around? What should we eat to permit real pesticide reduction? And this will be the last question for our panel today.
Thank you. That's a key question, actually. The way out of the potential dilemma of yield security is if we look at how all these calories and all the produce is actually used. So if we see that how currently the global food production capacity is used, then we have to, I think we all agree, it's used in an extremely inefficient way, because a huge quantity of potential food is used as feed, and a huge quantity is just lost as food waste. So these would be the obvious levers to tackle. And of course this, so we would need to adapt some of the dietary behavior, or food behavior, eating behavior, if you like. And of course reduce the food waste. And together I'm pretty sure we would create the room to maneuver and to compensate for potential slightly lower yields, if this would be the case in the initial phase. And we would certainly decrease the dependency on problematic farming practices as we have it now.
Thank you very much, Lucius. Thank you very much to all four of you, and we now have time for a few questions from the audience on this second round. Feel free, I know it's, we have a question over to the left.
I wanted to ask, is there an answer, we need to reduce pesticides in Green Deal. So the question is how it will be done. Can somebody answer, like all the countries need to reduce the pesticides by 50%, or it will be done on average because some countries use more than others? Is there any idea how it will be done?
I would say wait until June 23rd, because this is when the proposal of the Commission will be released, and there will be a lot of discussion on how to do it. But besides that, we all know that this is not everybody has to reduce, every farmer. That's what we are saying before. We need statistics on use. We need to find the hotspots. Each country, each region will have to know where to intervene, and this is why we need data. But on the particular subject on whether the target is put at European level, national level, or regional level, I cannot say, because we have not released yet the final draft legislation yet.
Okay, so wait and see. Another question?
In regard to the last remark from Lucius, what are the prospects for food wastes and the prospects for the policies and the practices where food wastes can become feed? Because when we feed plants to animals, we are making, nevertheless, complete protein. And so I know that some of the policies where pigs were fed food wastes had become forbidden. Is there any progress in this regard? Food wastes become feed for animals. Insects even, okay, even to raise insects that could be human food.
I'm not quite sure if food waste, it would be byproducts,
okay,
which would be used as feedstuff. And the legislation there is quite strict, so you cannot transform garbage into high quality feed. It's quite illegal, actually. So that's one of the restrictions. If you, as you mentioned, the insects, insect-based proteins, that's one of the key issues. You cannot feed the insects crap and expect high quality feed to come out of it. So there are limitations to this. I'm not quite sure if this answers your question, but
it could be an area of research, how to get crap into good feed as a ways of not wasting waste, food waste.
I think the expression is garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah, I'm quite sure this applies to databases.
Another question.
Yeah, I'm wondering, you said waste and you said, I can't remember, but there's a third one, it's bioenergy. So we are burning food crops in our cars. Is there a discussion about decreasing that, especially when we have these problems with high food prices?
Yeah, that's another one, especially in certain countries in Europe, where effectively the production of fuel and of energy in general competes with food production. And this, of course, this makes no sense either. But again, in the current political discussion and state of the world, that's a particularly tricky one to address. But I think it's pretty clear. The key message is that to make more efficient use of the potential food production is certainly giving us the room to maneuver to compensate for, to provide areas for biodiversity production, if you like, and other services. It's all about relieving the pressure that we depend so much on problematic farming practices as we do now. We need that room to maneuver.
Okay. Question up at the top on the center.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to get back to this argument which is often used by reducing pesticides. This will come to a cost of yield. If you look at the by far highest yielding cropping systems, it's greenhouse production. They use very little pesticides and there's a lot of biocontrol being used. So it shows that you can actually have very high quality, high level yielding crops while reducing pesticide use to a minimum or even avoiding pesticide use.
Anyone want to take this question? Was the question clear? I'm not sure if we heard him well enough. Philippe?
I guess that we shall understand that biocontrol, which is supposed to be I think that the matter of the question, is much more effective indeed in control conditions, and based on that observation, we could hope, to get comparable results in the open field level. But the thing is that, and that's an issue well known in the community involved in the research about biocontrol, that the environmental factors are much more important in determining the level of efficacy you get at the open field level compared to the control conditions. That's definitely an issue. And of course, these control conditions are providing lots of hope in terms of perspective, but it's been quite a long time since we face the situation that in open field conditions the results are not as, I would not say as good, but not as constant, reliable, even sometimes more partial than in close conditions, in protected conditions. That's something we've got to deal with. But still, biocontrol very, very gradually is also getting access to that stage at the open field level. So there's still some hope, if I should say, on that level. Yeah.
Okay, Jennifer, would you like to add on?
Thank you. Yes, and I think we should look at their model in Brazil, where they've been able to take types of biocontrol out into broadacre crops very effectively. And I think there may be some things that we can learn from the way they've done that. I think the other great opportunity we have is when we combine technologies. So when we look at what we have from big data, what we look at how we can set things up in terms of decision support systems, in terms of really understanding the optimal moment to apply, how to actually approach that, what's actually happening in the soil. We have all this data at our fingertips and digital tools to help us use it that changes what we can do with biocontrol, and by that I mean all types of biocontrol. So I think we have an opportunity here, particularly with all the researchers that we have in the room.
Yes.
And if I may say, I was very, very happy to hear your previous comment about the increased need of biologists to be involved, in the both science but also assessment, because in that case we are dealing in more and more biological issues and less chemical issues.
Okay, so I think I heard the word opportunity, and I think it's a very nice way to end this second panel. I would like to give a very big thank you to the second panel on fostering science-based policies and innovation. A big round of applause to Philippe, Jennifer, Lucius, and Emilio. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.